Check. Good now? Welcome back to Grace Gospel Fellowship. We are in a study of the person and work of Noah, of rest. And let's begin by reading verse 5 of Genesis 6. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air. For it repenteth me that I have made them. But where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Are you grateful for this morning for the strong adversative? That little word there. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. It's one of the reasons that you and I are here today. God wasn't forced to save the world through Noah. He had other options. He had other options when his spirit was being crushed. In that garden in which the world now recognizes the week that we are in as Holy Week. Aren't they all this side of the empty tomb? But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And these are the generations of Noah, a just man, unblemished, and Noah walked with God. And Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth was also corrupt and filled with violence. God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and you shall pitch it, cover it within and without with pitch. And then God goes on to describe this ark. So this morning I'd like to get into some of the similarities. Last week we talked about the occasion for the flood, that Nephilim, the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of man, had corrupted the bloodline. And today I would like to talk to you about that invisible war for which the Bible gives record, and also about the remedy that God establishes in type in Noah and in antitype in the person of Christ and his work seen in the expression of a boat. The invisible war, first of all. It begins with man involved in Genesis 3:15. It actually begins in the heart of the greatest creature genius that God had ever made, in the heart of Lucifer, light bearer, when he decided to revolt against his maker. And you could find that, we looked at it on several occasions in Isaiah and Ezekiel. But it comes down, this war comes down to man. In Genesis chapter 3, you have the fall. And then you have a pronouncement of what is called the curse, not just on man and the earth, but also on the perpetrator, known here as the Shining One, the great dragon. The Lord said in verse 14, unto the Shining One, because you have done this, You are cursed above all cattle, above every beast of the field. Upon your belly shall you crawl, and dust shall you eat all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and you shall bruise his heel. So there is a mortal engagement described in verse 15 of Genesis 3. And I want you to understand this was probably the greatest achievement that Lucifer had had in his fallen state. The seduction of Eve, the entrapment of mankind to sin after his own sin, to not mimic their creator, but to mimic him. And that is what he seeks to do. And mankind, our progenitors, followed after Satan in the very sin of pride, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. And Eve grasped that which was not hers to take in equality with God. And in the midst of his joyous triumph, he hears his archenemy declare a prophecy that includes his doom. And it must have come as quite a shock. I don't think a creature with that kind of genius and that brilliance would dismiss the word of the Lord when he finds out that his undoing won't be directly in a face-off, face-to-face with God, nor would it be directly with Michael the archangel, but this mortal, fallible creature that he had so easily entrapped would breed his undoing. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, a hostility between this, the highest created general in the angelic realm, and between her seed. There's the first cryptic message in Scriptures really found here. It must have boggled the mind of the great dragon. But he was able to realize that somehow, I'm sure when Cain and Abel were brought forth, that somehow in that line would be a man that not only could stand in front of him, but would defeat him. And in exchange, that man would walk away limping, but he would crush the head of the serpent, a mortal blow, not something you walk away from. And so here, Genesis 3:15 is the announcement of the invisible war that includes man that takes place here on planet Earth. And then the angelic conflict, what others call the angelic conflict, brought out so well in Revelation chapter 12. Would you turn there quickly? Revelation's a very powerful book, great imagery. John here tells pretty much the history of warfare from Genesis 3:15 forward. He does it very briefly, and we've taken verses 4 and verses 5 to concentrate on, but what's described here are symbols that are related to the nation of Israel. And you have a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars, and being with a child cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. So you have a pregnant woman here, not necessarily directly a picture of Mary. Of course, Mary is contained in this picture. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, a sign, behold, a great red dragon. having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. I'm often astounded to hear men and women of good intent, Christians, saying that 7 is the number of God. Well, 7 is a number that is greatly related to God because actually in scriptural numerology, 7 means complete. And there's a lot of things about God that are complete. But 7 is not the number of God because here it is connected to his chief nemesis, the adversary, Satan. And so when it says here, you know, when God is described as having 7 eyes, what it's saying is he has complete omnipresence. There's nothing that he doesn't see. A sparrow falls. The poet says that he's even in attendance at a sparrow's funeral. So nothing goes outside of his notice, and certainly this account in Genesis begins with the eyes of Jehovah as he surveys the earth, and it's all destroyed with the exception of Noah. But here, another wonder in heaven, a great dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. So Satan here is pictured as having complete control. We find that that's true as a result of the fall. That dominion that was given to Adam was stolen, it was usurped. King John sits on Richard's throne. And his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. Now, we sometimes minimize the person of Satan. And Hollywood does a great job, and our culture does a great job in making him a mockery and something to laugh at. And even some of our tuna cans have him with a little pointed red tail and a trident, and if you believe in him, he's kind of like just a little gremlin or a sprite. But here he had the largeness of personality. He had such a commanding personality that he was able to lure not just Adam and Eve, but a 1/3 of the heavenly host to follow him. And that is no small accomplishment. Beings that had served and had worshiped God Almighty from the moment of their creation. They had been present. They sang in company. Lucifer with them probably led the singing when the universe was being stretched, when it was laid out, when God breathed matter and energy. They were present, according to Job, and they sang in unison, in company, as a choir together. And a 1/3 of those decided to walk away from God to follow this person. I know it's commonplace, especially in Pentecostal circles, to act like we can control Satan, like he's a puppet and we could just shoo him away. It's just, first of all, it's an amazing lack of intelligence and information about the person of Satan, who, according to Scripture, the man of sin that he raises up would be able to even fool the elect if God didn't spare us, let alone the person behind that man. Michael doesn't even bring an accusation to him. He says, the Lord will deal with thee. Michael, the archangel, and we joke around about how we can tell Satan to get lost, as if he really even has us on the morning docket and hasn't assigned to us some junior grade private in his hierarchy. Well, and his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to be delivered, to devour her child as soon as it was born. Does it strike you as particularly horrifying that when God draws a picture of the angelic conflict, of the holy war, this invisible war that's taking place, he does so drawing it with a pregnant woman and his enemy waiting to commit infanticide? A cannibal murderer waiting to destroy a baby. The first place in the world we see this kind of craziness is in God's description of the first murderer, the father of lies. The father of lies has had great success in this country and around the world, China and India and elsewhere, convincing the woman to do his work for him. Don't think that that kind of a pressure was not on Joseph and Mary. And he stood before the woman, ready, the woman who was ready to be delivered to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. You know, in just half of verse 4 and verse 5, John tells the story of the history of man from the moment that Adam bit the forbidden fruit to the very moment of our Lord's ascension post-resurrection. Brief. He's very brief. Spent less time on it than I will today. But that is the summary, John's summary of this great conflict. And interesting how he puts it. She brought forth a man-child. This was her seed, who was to rule all the nations. The child that is born, the son that was given, the government will be upon his shoulder. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. Language here that is very reminiscent of a story you're about to hear with Queen Athaliah and Joash. So here it is. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. That is yet to happen. That is where Israel flees during the Great Tribulation, for protection against the animosity of the son of perdition, who is in complete control of the world's governments, pulls them like strings, and still seeks to destroy that which will crush his head. Maybe he's still in denial about the cross, still trying to rewrite not history, but prophecy. And John does it briefly for us in just 2 words. Can we briefly survey the assaults of the enemy, and then we'll get into the person and work of Noah as a type of Christ? The assaults of the great enemy. All right, let's see. This, by the way, is listed, I have used as a source of the following slides, Appendix 23 in the Companion Bible of E.W. Bullinger, study Bible I highly recommend that you use, but you don't have to. You could find these appendices online for free, and we have a copy of Appendix 23 and 25 in the tape room if you so desire. The destruction of the chosen family by famine, Genesis 50:20, was another in the line prior, post-flood, of Satan's attempts to rewrite Genesis 3:15. The destruction of the male line in Israel, Exodus 1, 10 and 15. You could compare chapter 2, verse 5 with Hebrews 11:23. Now, we all know that story. It gave birth to the second ark, the ark of the bulrushes that Moses was put in. The Hebrew midwives who disobeyed their government. You know, Romans 13, we'll take some time in a few weeks to talk about Romans 13, but the government and authorities that are in power are put there by God to act in lieu of Him as the ultimate authority. They're given a sword so that they can punish evil and bless righteousness. That is the role of government. If you're asked what is the role of government, you don't have to get into long, drawn-out discussions about Ayn Rand or about the Austrian School of Economics. There's different forms of government that could still be a blessing. It doesn't have to be a constitutional republic. There have been monarchies that have been a blessing to God. We can argue about what form is better given the nature of man's soul, but the purpose of government, which was the fourth great institution that God birthed through the Noahic covenant, the purpose of government is to corporately punish evil and to bless the righteous. That's it, period. Now, there's some subsets in the development of that, but that's why they're around. Now, when you start to persecute the righteous and bless the evil, you have lost the grounds for your authority, and our forefathers realized that it is incumbent upon a righteous man, a free man, to act in the defense of righteousness. Our forefathers used the term to alter or abolish. When I hear those words, alter or abolish, I think of not just the ballot box, but also the bullet box, because that's what it entails sometimes. Now, judging between the two is a hard thing sometimes. We'll take that up another day. So the destruction of the male line in Israel, God's people were told abortion's going to be in effect. Every male child born will be put to death. That was the law of the land. It was a law that was disobeyed by first the Hebrew midwives and then Moses' parents, and they were blessed in their disobedience, because ultimately they were actually being obedient to the higher law. And Martin Luther King brought this out rather beautifully. So, by the way, before him did Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther and others, that when a law is in conflict, is the antithesis of God's law, it is not a just law, and just men are not only just in disobeying it, it is their duty to disobey. The destruction of the whole nation in Pharaoh's pursuit, Pharaoh pursuing them to the Red Sea, was another attempt inspired by Satan. And after David's line was singled out in 2 Samuel 7, that was the next selected for assault. Satan's first assault was in the union of Jehoram and Athaliah by Jehoshaphat, notwithstanding 2 Chronicles 17:1. Jehoram killed off all his brothers in 2 Chronicles 21:4. And then when Ahaziah died, Athaliah killed all the seed royal. That doesn't affect some of us as it should. The seed royal that she killed were her grandsons. She was the grandmother, and she killed all the seed royal because she wanted to secure the throne. The babe Joash alone was rescued. For 6 years, the faithfulness of Jehovah's word was at stake, 2 Chronicles 23:3. Joash was a type of Christ, brought out by John in Revelation 12 when it says the child was raised up to sit at the throne, because he was hidden by the high priest for 6 years. For 6 years in human history, Satan had to kill but one child, and it would have stopped the prophecy of the coming Redeemer. There was one child who had the blood that God had promised that would come through David. Well, that's happened on a number of occasions. We've seen it. We're talking about Noah. Hezekiah was childless when a double assault was made by the king of Assyria and the king of terrors. God's faithfulness was appealed to and relied on in Psalm 136. In captivity, Haman was used to attempt the destruction of the whole nation. Esther 3. Saved but for the courage. I know everyone likes to give it to Esther. Esther's courage was inspired by her stepfather, her uncle. Herod sought the young child's life in Matthew 2, and in a stunningly reminiscent moment of history where history seems to repeat itself, but ultimately it paraphrases, Herod acted as Pharaoh did. It's funny how he believed the prophecy to a point, you know. The scribes who instructed Herod about the prophecy said the babe would be born in Bethlehem. That's what the prophecy says. And Herod believed it. Believed it to the point that he ordered soldiers to take every male child in that region, 2 years old and under, and smash their head against the stone. Now you'd think if somebody believed that prophecy, they'd do what the Magi did. They'd seek out the child and bow down and glorify God in the doing. See, sometimes we think that the world is set up in two sides, those who believe and those who don't believe, unbelievers. Herod was a believer. He believed and he hated. I don't know many atheists that don't believe. I know a lot of atheists who will claim not to believe, and their hostility doesn't take but a question or two to come out. And it's never hostility towards Zoroaster. They don't hate the panoply of Hindu gods. You never find an atheist defacing that woman with the elephant head. Okay. Herod sought the young child's life in Matthew 2. We're looking at these attempts by Satan to stop that prophecy from coming true. At the temptation he tries to do to Jesus Christ what he was successful in doing to Eve, what he was successful in doing to Israel in the wilderness. The temptation is exactly the same. And why not? It had never failed. You know, when I talk about Satan and the wiles of the devil that Paul mentions in Ephesians, he doesn't have a big playbook. It's kind of like, remember the Titans. You know, that team had 6 plays, but they ran them so well they didn't need more than 6 plays. Like the Green Bay sweep. Everybody and their brother knew when Lombardi was running the sweep. They knew the formation. They knew it was coming. They couldn't stop it. He basically had a Billy Jack style of offense. He basically said, we're going to pull both guards. We're going to run around the right end. I'm going to kick you on the right side of your face with my left foot, and there's nothing you can do about it. And for the most part, he was right, until Satan tried to do it with Christ. And the famous words from Jesus, echoing that truth in Deuteronomy, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Every time he was challenged by Satan, his answer wasn't Plato or Aristotle. It was actually Deuteronomy. He answered with the words of God. We think that it was nothing. Angels had to come minister to him after the temptation. Interesting thing, angels. In a few weeks, we're going to have a session just on angels. What do you know about angels? You ask your friends, you get some interesting answers. I'm about to post that question, what do you know about angels? Because even Christians are confused about angels. We think about angels, and some people, their knowledge of angels is simply the doctrine of Frank Capra and Clarence. Every time a bell rings, right? An angel gets it. Some people think that angels are actually the departed human dead, like our loved ones who have died, and eventually God gives them wings, and that's who they are in heaven. But no, they're distinct and separate race. So what do we know about angels? Is it Jewish superstition? Do we respond to the Jewish superstition in the apocryphal books? Or are we responding to the imagination of foolish Christians and the secular world who depicts angels? It's ironic. You type in cherubim to your searches and see what comes up in images. And it'll be very divided. Sometimes you'll get a fat baby with wings and a bow to describe what the Bible says is the most fearsome creature in all of creation. A creature that nearly every time it came into contact as a messenger of God to talk to man had to begin the conversation with, don't do that in your pants. It's okay. I'm here because it's a peaceful mission. Fear not, is the first thing they almost always have to say. Unless, of course, they've cloaked their glory for a different reason. How did we get on that? Angels. Well, that's coming. At the temptation, cast yourself down was Satan's temptation. Again in Gethsemane. Nazareth, again, there was another attempt to cast him down and destroy him. The two storms on the lake were other attempts. We think it's natural. God, Jesus Christ, rebuked the waves. How weird does that sound? The Lord of the storm had to tell the storm, quit it. Well, what worked the storm up in the first place? Why would nature need to be rebuked? You find out the warfare of angels is natural. Cataclysm. The cross was an attempt. I want to say, I think Gibson did so well in depicting it. I have a feeling that Satan thought this was it. He had finally done it. I think his victory lap was short-lived. Certainly, the empty tomb is what revealed it to him. Lewis depicts this so well in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, with Aslan being sheared and tied, and the witch killing him, and despair all around in that darkness until Aslan reappears and talks about the deeper magic of the table of law that was destroyed in his death, and how it actually was needed to undo the control of the White Witch in Narnia. So much depth in that little fairy tale. More wisdom in that little fairy tale than in the majority of pulpits today, probably. So the assaults of the great enemy. We read Scripture and we miss the fact that behind the headlines, behind the history textbooks, behind all that's happening today, we are missing the fact that a war is being waged, and Satan and Christ are fighting over every inch of this earth and every soul. All right. Here's a summary of the assaults of the great enemy from the beginning. The first one was the seduction of Eve, and then the murder of Abel, and then the eruption of the sons of God in Genesis 6, directed against the whole of the human race, It's funny how in Braveheart, Longshanks comes up with the plan because the Scots are too tough to take. So he says, we'll breed them out, and I'll give the right of primo nocti, first night, that a lord of the region can take a woman into his bed on the night of her marriage, and the idea is that he'll impregnate her. It'll be an English son before she's ever bearing another Scot, and over time they will breed out their enemies. This same conversation was held with greater technology at the Wannsee Conference during World War II, when they decided first that they would sterilize every Jewish male, and then that they would simply evacuate them. Do you know the term used by the Nazis to come up with the Jewish solution? This is going to be frightful for you if you're in the pro-life movement or you know anything about the terminology of abortion. But the abortion doctors use a word called evacuation. Yeah, they use the word. They don't call it, certainly, by what it really is. They use the term evacuation for the abortion. They're not killing it, they're just evacuating it, right? That was the exact term used in the German for what would happen to the Jew in Europe, evacuation. And it actually meant gas and then burn. But they didn't want to really say what it really was. The eruption of fallen angels, the sons of God, directed against the whole of the human race. When Abraham was called, then he and his seed were attacked. When David was enthroned, then the royal line was assailed. You see, in Genesis 3:15, God simply says to his enemy, from her seed your destroyer shall arise. Well, her seed was Eve, the mother of all. That's all the human race. So his focus was on destroying the human race. Then prophecy narrowed, and Abraham was chosen. Well, Abraham was from one of Noah's 3 sons, Shem. So the focus could now be on the line of Abraham, a Semite, father of the Jews and the Arabs and the Assyrians. So it focused to Abraham. But then God says, you know what? From the line of Jesse, through David, will the Messiah come, this one who will rule forever. Oh, now it got even more specific. Now we knew it was from this race, really an ethnicity, Jews. But not simply the Jewish race, because let's face it, at the time, I should say Israel to be exact, Israel had 13 tribes. Now God had said it's going to be from Judah. Guess what happens? Through Solomon, the country splits. It divides between 10 tribes and Judah and Benjamin. And the 10 tribes of the north are encouraged to destroy Judah. And the focus of satanic hostility rested on a single tribe in all the world. Now, sure, he probably still hates humanity. What's there to like from the world's greatest creature? But the focus narrowed to Judah and then to the family of Jesse, not just the tribe now. It had to be somebody who had the blood of David, the Bethlehemite. You know, earthly kings still celebrate this, even into our day. Do you realize this? Some of you out there, probably your favorite movie is Godfather, right? Certainly was one of the great ones. And we have stories here in America, the Hatfields and McCoys, all that kind of thing. But you know, when an ancient king was deposed, all his male line was put to death. Because no new king wanted to have to look over his shoulder at somebody who could come with an army and some papers saying, I'm the rightful king. So ancient kings would put to death every male child. The first thing you'd want to do is get them out of the way. If your father was the king and he died, you'd want to make yourself scarce. You know, it's the very reason my favorite story of David isn't David and Goliath or David and Jonathan. Those are awesome stories. My favorite story of David is David and Mephibosheth. Nobody knows that story, but that's exactly what happened with Mephibosheth. He was of the offspring of the line of Saul. And when his maid, his nanny, heard that Saul and Jonathan had died, you know, the first thing she did is she picked up the child and she ran for his life to hide, because she thought David would be like every other king. Now that David's king, he's going to kill every male child of Saul. And she, in her hurry, tripped, fell on the child, and from that moment on, I think he was 5 or 6, he was lame in both legs. And David not only lets him live, he gives him back the lands of Saul that had been taken, and he allows him to sit at the king's table. There's a picture of what God has done to us. A natural enemy made family. A beautiful story. But that comes, listen, now in the mafia, when the families, you kill every male child. It happens in The Godfather. It still happens today in some places in this world. It's the natural default setting of evil man. So here, David enthroned, the royal line was assailed. And when the seed of the woman himself came, Jesus Christ, then the storm burst upon him. Now let's get into the person of Noah, who by his very name is a type of Christ. I don't think we see this. We see the story of Noah. It's an epic story. You know, God decides to destroy the earth. We don't really know why. He's grumpy. He wakes up grumpy. I mean, what was the generation of Noah actually doing that's really any different from our spring break? It says they were eating, they were drinking, they were giving in marriage. Marriage is not a bad thing in the Bible. It's a divine institution. So what it means is they had polluted the idea of marriage. Sound familiar? And then Christ says, when I return, that generation will be as it was in the days of Noah. So we have some kind of an idea when we study the days of Noah. Bloodline was messed up. And Lamech names him Rest, and it's a prophetic name because he is told from God that this person will bring rest from your travail. And Lamech mentions the original curse, the tilling of the ground. Interesting. We see Noah as a herald of the condemnation of the whole world. And certainly he is that. But we only regard the one side of the coin. Would you have named him Rest? In light of what he's famous for, in light of the fact that every soul and animal that wasn't within that ark perished, would you have said, yeah, let's call him Rest? It certainly wasn't rest to those people who perished. No, Jesus Christ, it said, Isaiah speaks of him, and his rest that shall be glorious. But the beautiful passage is really in Matthew 11:28, where Jesus Christ says, come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. There's a guitar player, lead singer of a band called Korn. I think some of you have seen his testimony. Heroin addict, horrible lifestyle, wrote filthy music, and the world loved him for it, so he was celebrated and rich and famous, but he was suicidal. He had a child, a young girl, and he wanted a better life for her, but he was an addict, had a real estate agent. A real estate agent that made good money off of this rich guy, right? Pretty good money, 6%. 6% of a lot is a lot, right? And he risked that relationship by confronting him one day with love, but not knowing what the outcome would be. And he said, Brian, he said, you look like you could use some rest. Can I tell you about Jesus Christ? That one conversation turned his life around. He met Christ, he's saved. And I'm not going to tell you how he's off drugs and all that, because who knows, maybe next week he'll be on them again, but he still has an eternal destiny now, and his vision has changed and everything changed. Because one man had the courage to ask the question that a lot of us swallow our tongues over. We know the answer to true rest. Why are we scared to share it? Hey, listen, if you have a cough on the internet, if I cough from the pulpit, I'll have 7 people meet me after church suggesting I take these pills from this website and telling me what's wrong with me. You know, I think it's this. You know, and if they reach me at the same time, a great argument's going to break up because none of their stories, none of their diagnoses are the same, you see. And so, you know, it's kind of neat. But you do that on the internet, you say you're not feeling well, you're going to get people that are sharing web pages with you. Oh, here's your problem. You eat too much this, blah, blah, blah. Or, you know, the carcinogens in this. Or you drink diet soda in this. And you'll get hundreds of responses for a physical malady that matters nothing. Physical comfort. But we Christians know true comfort, true rest. We know his name. We know his address. We can get you an appointment. And we don't mention it. Someone coughs, we'll mention it. But we hold the door open to a Christless grave as friends and neighbors slip into condemnation simply because we don't want to upset the apple cart. They might not talk to us anymore. Or, worse yet, they might talk about us and laugh. Come unto me, all ye labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Noah, as a type of Christ, he was unblemished. They've given me my lights. We'll wrap this up in the third session. I want to say to you, though, as a picture of salvation, these 2 things, and this is something that every Christian needs to understand. When God builds the ark, a picture of salvation from the coming wrath, he says, come into the ark. Come into the ark. He doesn't say go into the ark. It's an invitation. But when the ark lands, by the way, on Resurrection Sunday, when the ark lands, he tells Noah and the family, go forth. And these are the 2 great things that every individual needs to understand. One is an invitation, one is a command. God only commands his children. He invites us into the family, but once we come in, once we are shod with the sandals, once he puts the signet ring, his ring, on our finger, once we're robed with the family robe, he says, go forth. The first message is to the dead. And it ends up, if you take the invitation, with let there be light. The second message is to the disciple. A lot of Christians I know, they're still on the ark. It's a picture of the womb, friends. My father used to say, Our time here on earth is kind of like being time in a womb, and death is birth. And that's true. We might have the capacity for life in the womb, but our destiny was for life outside of it. I know a lot of Christians who God has told to go forth from the ark, and they're still in there. All right, let's invite Bill up for a few. But